Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Introduction to Debating. I'm Will, and I'm the secretary of the Debate Society here at the University of Sheffield. So in our introduction in episode 1, we really began to just look at the fundamentals of debating, so what BP debating is, sort of the formats, the government bench, opposition bench, and then taking a look at the specific teams, like the opening half, closing half, and then what the roles of each of these teams are. We looked at how to really structure our arguments using the STAMP acronym, and then we discussed note-taking, making sure that we're not knifing and avoiding being derivative. So it was just like a very broad, encompassing sort of introduction to debating. In today's episode, we are going to more look at specifically the motions you are going to find within a debate. You can have all these amazing, ways in which you think you are going to be able to speak, and you might actually be thinking, well, why would you need a specific video on motions? Aren't motions just simply asking questions and I can just take a side? Well, fundamentally, yes, but in BP debating specifically, motions actually have certain needs, and judges have expectations of what you are actually specifically going to be debating about, and that there are certain components within your speeches that tick off those boxes. So what I'm really here is to guide you through the different types of motions we are going to see within BP debating, and to make sure that you are completely covered for when you are debating either in your society or within competitions. So, what actually are motions? Motions, in the simplest of terms, are controversial statements that are brought forward that must be argued either for or against by the four teams. So remember, as we said before, that there are the two benches. So we have the government bench and opposing bench. So we have two teams that will be arguing for a motion and two teams arguing against a motion. These two teams are always going to be sort of unanimously agreeing that in favour or against a motion. So you're not going to have a team that's kind of slightly in the middle. You're always going to have a team that is very clearly sort of for and against a proposed motion. So the types of motions we are going to see in debating are going to vary a lot. Each one is going to ask you a slightly different things from you, and this might be ranging from to create an in-depth policy that might be discussing the ins and outs of who's going to be affected, the scope of that, or it actually might even be asking you to consider an alternative world. So, as I said, it's understanding what the motion wants from you is crucial for your debating success and for you to actually succeed and win in your debates. So, one thing I actually missed from the introduction to debating, and I'm really happy I kind of covered this when I re-watched the video, and that we can now go into now, is kind of discussing actually how a judge is going to judge you. So, judges use something known as an average intelligent voter. So this is a fictitious person who is very open-minded, like they can be persuaded from either side, so they do not have an inherent bias towards a specific belief system. They are semi-rational, so they are going to be not purely rational. They will take things, so if you list simply concrete explanations, are not always going to triumph over the emotional impacts of things. They are just an average human being that can rationalize, but always not perfectly. And they specifically lack industry knowledge. So this kind of ties into something I discussed in the previous episode, where in your prep time you cannot use the internet. So this is not just purely because it's cheating, it's also because using the internet is not going to help you at all with these average intelligent voters, with these judges. The reason why is because since these voters do not have the in-depth insights into an industry, they cannot believe you. They're not going to be able to believe the thousands of facts and figures you're going to simply present to them, because they do not know that the data exists and they don't know how to interpret that data. So, as I said, the reason why we do BP debating is not to just blast a million data sets at a random individual. Is we're actually just simply looking at ways to develop our concrete ways to rationalize thought and to very meticulously integrate logical steps and chains to make our arguments sound and cohesive. So, let's move into the first type of motion you're going to see. So, the first type is this house would. All motions are going to start with this house. And then, this house would motion is something known as a policy motion. You might also say this house will. That's far less common than would. It's almost always going to be would. A policy motion every single time is going to ask the government bench to offer a model on a proposed policy. So it is the duty of the government to describe what this policy is going to look like and its benefits. So this might include details of who it's going to affect, how long they're going to be affected for, who implements it, that sort of thing. It's a very broad general scope of how this policy is actually going to look. So rather than simply agreeing with a policy, it's what the intricacies, how is this actually going to be tangibly assessed. An example of this would be this house would introduce a mandatory universal basic income. So it would be the role of the government, and let's say the Prime Minister, to really open up the debate and say, define universal basic income and how this is going to be implemented on a worldwide scale. So is it going to be at a consistent rate, let's say against the US minimum wage or the living wage of the UK, or is it going to be on a country-by-country basis, depending upon the economic needs and inflation of each country? So it's then the government then introduces the benefits, that sort of thing. And then it'll be the opposition's job not to necessarily offer a counter policy. They don't have to. If you can, great. But it's far easier for the opposition to simply just disagree with the policy. They can say, nope, this policy is ridiculous and heinous and we hate it. We hate universal basic income. And here are reasons why we don't agree with it. It might be the fact that the affordability of a universal basic income is simply irrational, or the fact that maybe with a universal basic income it then increases inflation from a wage push inflation. They might offer that, but then they would have to describe specifically what that looks like. So again, it's just simply introducing. It's introducing the motion, introducing the policy, and then it's a back and forth on whether or not the policy being introduced is actually going to be good or not. I recommend for the Prime Minister, really do not spend more than 2 minutes discussing this. Like, do not go into too much detail, because you also want to make your points. You want to show the impact of the policy. You're not just simply proposing a policy. You're not a politician who just simply drafts up a stupid bill that no one agrees with. No, you actually have to tell us why this bill is actually good, which again, no politician seems to be able to do nowadays. So moving on, the next type of motion we have is something known as an actor motion, and an actor motion can actually tie into partially to the policy motions, but as an individual, this house as an actor is a type of motion where your role is to focus specifically on the stakeholder that is being discussed and why taking specific action is better on your side of the house in comparison to the other. So actually, real quickly, what actually is an actor? So an actor it could be a literal actor, but an actor is just simply a placeholder term for either an individual or a group of people, and would they actually go forth with a policy or as a belief system? Would they take a course of action, which we're going to divulge into later. And it's simply your job. You don't have to introduce a policy. It really depends upon the motion specifics. But generally, you are going to be advocating for why, if you are in the shoes of the actor, why on your side of the house the actor is going to be better off, and why on the other side they're going to be worse off. So an example of this came from the World Debating Championships. I believe it was 2016. Please comment if I was wrong, but an example of the actor motion is this house, as the world's poor, would be justified to pursue a complete Marxist revolution. So you can see that there's really there's two main components of this. So it's this house as the world's poor. So this is our actor. Would is sort of like the placeholder. It's sort of like, how is this going to be introduced? And again, discussing the policies of that, and justified to pursue a complete Marxist revolution. So in this debate, you would have the government side would be saying that we as the world's poor live maybe in a system of systematic oppression, and that this is the only way in which we can bring back economic and social equality and equity to all. And then you discuss sort of how this could be implemented. You don't have to go into the specifics of a Marxist revolution. It might simply just be, how is this going to actually be brought into light? So it might be simply just replacing current systems through electoral votes, or it could be a complete revolution, overthrowing governments who refuse, that sort of thing. So then the government would just argue why that is good and why the poor is justified, and then the opposition would say, well, actually no, the poor wouldn't be justified because they would be worse off, because Marxism and communism as an economic and political model is a gateway for dictatorship and corruption, and economically is not viable. That's what they will likely argue. So then it's the back and forth on, actually no, on the opposition side, we are not justified because it's going to be worse off for us. We can justify to have a socialist maybe revolution, which might, and then they might detail why that might be better, but they are arguing, completely arguing against why the proposed motion is not sound. So, moving on, we have our third, and this is a very broad, sort of encompassing motion type. It's an analysis motion. So the first analysis motion we have is this house believes. So in this house believes motions, the arguments being made here hinge on actually assessing the truthfulness of a statement from a neutral observer. So an example of this might be, this house believes that globalization has failed. So it's not it is a motion which could be true and could be false. It's then just simply which side is claiming it is true and which side is claiming it is false. So the government side might say that globalization has failed because with an increase in globalization, there's an increased amount of exploitation for countries which developed at a slower economic rate due to colonial influence, which limited social mobility and economic progress. Whereas the opposition might say, well, actually globalization has led to an increase in medical technology and economies growing at a far faster rate than if they were focusing on maybe like rugged individualism like the United States did in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. So it's then this back and forth on, it's then each side is trying to prove why either the advantages of a case is better than the disadvantages of it. That's really what they're trying to look at. They're trying to basically just say why it is more true for it to be on our side than false on your side. That's really all they're trying to say. Moving on to the second type of analysis motion we have. These are really essentially just the same motion. It's this house supports or this house opposes. And this involves simply valuing judgments and requiring debaters to describe and justify their stance on the subject. This is really the closest thing you're actually going to get to a like how you might see a common debate like on TikTok, YouTube. You know, it's just one person arguing like this is really good, and another person saying no, this is really bad. And then they're just going on a back and forth. And I do support it, completely unconditionally support it, or no, I can unconditionally I hate this. An example of this House supports motion might be this House supports legalizing hate speech. You might really love hating people, and you want to, you completely support it, and you'll give reasons why you support this. And then obviously the opposition would then say, no, we don't agree with this at all. Or it could be that this House actually opposes legalizing recreational drugs. So then the government bench would say why legalizing recreational drugs is really bad, whilst the opposition says actually no, it's really good. And as I kind of mentioned before, you have to unconditionally support. So you can't be on the fence. You cannot say I oppose legalizing recreational drugs, but I love to have a good spliff on the weekend, so maybe not weed. No, you have to completely support or oppose a motion. You can't be on the fence here. Moving on, we have this House regrets motions. This is really kind of getting into what I personally feel to be quite juicy, interesting motions. These are motions which are reflecting upon previously completed events and questions whether or not the world would actually be better off without the event taking place. So what does this actually mean? This basically means that, let's say that this House regrets the privatization of news outlets. So what this does is it simply says, we regret having this, and actually it might be better off if all news outlets were owned by the government instead, so private firms did not have control and cannot publicly output news. Actually, we'd be better off this way if they couldn't do that, and only the government can control this. And then the opposition would say, actually, this House does not regret it. The world is better off. So the government is going to argue for this alternative world where this event did not occur, and the opposition would then argue for why the status quo is actually better than this alternative world. That's really where our big clash is. I'm kind of moving in to our last sort of motion you're going to see. Again, this is another world comparison. So it's this House prefers. So this House prefers motions involve directly comparing two contrasting worlds, one with and one without the proposal. And this is going to require actually a lot of framing, probably more on the government side, on terms of how actors, how society is going to be run, that sort of thing. So whatever is being preferred, they have to really characterize and demonstrate and prove why this is going to be the case. So a really big example of this is this House prefers a world where everyone has superpowers. So the government bench might say, well, in this other world, humanity can accelerate their development. Humans are going to be far stronger, which means that mortality rates are going to be far lower, and that we are able to accelerate as a species and ensure our survival. You may argue that. But then the opposition might say, well, actually, we prefer our world, and the reason why is because sort of in this other world, where you do have these superheroes, there might be greater social inequality because not all superpowers are likely going to be the same. Some are going to be far higher, far stronger, some people are going to be far weaker, and that's actually going to create a social class system based upon how strong you are, and actually might give way to dictatorship and the power to a few. So, and this is going to be far worse because it's now physical violence instead of like economic influence that can be far more mitigated in the current world. So that's what the opposition might propose. So it's really just a criticism of why this other world, very similar to the regrets motion, it's very similar to just actually no, this hypothetical is really bad, we just prefer the status quo. So that is really it in terms of motions. I know this video is shorter than the introduction video, but I really do hope that you were able to find some value within this video. I do really recommend you go back through the video and take notes on just the different types of motions. You don't have to listen to me rambling on again. You can just write down what is on the slides, and you can simply just write those down, and then when you go into your competitions or anything like that, have that on like a living offline document that you can just refer back to, and that you can simply just double check that you are ticking all those boxes and making sure you are arguing for the correct thing and that the judges make sure that they absolutely love you. So yeah, so thank you all so much for watching, and happy debating. I will see you all later. Goodbye.